thank you so much, Andrew, for the introduction. As he said, from Social Capital Partners, and for the past 17 years, we've been helping people facing barriers to employment find good jobs. And we recently did start looking at jobs of the future and whether that, with all of the things that we're hearing, are those jobs going to still mean the same thing to us as they do today? So in our work, we've always thought that a good job equals full-time permanent employment. But Future of Work was suggesting that there's going to be fewer of those full-time jobs available. So we found ourselves a little lost, and we thought, let's dive into researching the future of work so we can really understand it better. And from that work, we really identified a few key themes. And some of those were that there are going to be fewer full-time permanent jobs. More people are going to be doing multiple jobs over their career, and a lot of the time more than one at a time. And then more and more freelancers are going to be using online platforms to find this work. Just want to make sure that worked. And so given this, we figured out that just like everyone else, the people that we focus on, people facing barriers to employment, are going to be doing more freelance work in the future. So we wanted to ask ourselves an important question. How can Canada become the best place in the world to be a freelance worker? And for us to answer that question properly, we wanted to identify what were the gaps that exist for freelancers as they are today. So Canada's social safety net, I think as you all know, is actually pretty good for people in full-time permanent jobs. But the number of workers that are living without this safety net is actually surprisingly large, and it continues to grow very quickly. So early in our research, we sort of made this realization that it's not just about the future of work anymore, but we really need to be looking at what we're calling the present of work. So that's what led us down this pathway to see what are today's solutions happening around the world and in Canada that can help make Canada the best place in the world to be a freelance worker. So as my introduction to this panel, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we mean by the present of work and what is the situation for those Canadian workers, you guys, essentially. And we're going to talk about the great ideas that are out there to help, and I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the things that we could probably focus on next. So historically, we know that Canada has actually cared pretty deeply about its workers, and this has resulted in quite a significant social safety net. There's simple administrative examples like a T4 that's generated by an employer. This makes it so much easier to do your taxes. As we just heard, taxes are complicated in your situation. Long-term planning is easier when retirement savings or pension plan contributions come right off your paycheck. Even things like employment insurance, that's automatically paid into by an employer. So our question was, how available are these supports to freelancers today? And another question we had was that even if you are part of the independent workforce by choice, and this is something that you want to do, doesn't it still make sense that everybody should have access to a similar safety net? So Deloitte actually had a really interesting view on this, and it was stated in a recent report. They said, Canada's existing labor law, employment practices, and social programs are vestiges of the Great Depression of the 1930s. They go on in the report to talk a lot about how everything needs to be completely modernized. And then we have a quote from Shelby Clark of Peers, and she pretty much sums up the situation for a lot of freelancers. And that is, an independent worker, all this infrastructure and stuff used to be taken care of by a company, and now you have to figure it out on your own. It can be impossible to solve. So I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people in the room today. And having to figure it out on your own definitely results in a lot of extra stress, especially if being an independent worker wasn't by choice, but it was more by chance. So things like income being unpredictable can make it really difficult for you to purchase things like cars and houses and save up for those things. Even vacations can be difficult. And then if you can't afford a vacation, we've heard from a lot of people that there's a fear of losing those clients because they don't have anyone to cover for them. Also, as somebody who's a permanent employee, I have access to pay stubs, and I was able to take those into a bank, and within 24 hours I was pre-qualified for a mortgage. I know that freelancers, it's a lot more complicated for you to explain your income, and that results in instantly more complicated processes for getting lending, let alone something as complicated as a mortgage. So we wanted to review that, and we want to share that we get not everybody experiences the things I just talked about, and not everybody experiences them at the same time. We also get that a lot of people in the room are that more by choice independent worker, and that a lot of you are making that explicit trade-off for that flexibility and independence. But our point that we want to make before we go into the next phase is that we as Canadians decided together to build this support system for workers, and that support system was built on over time to improve lives for everybody. And right now, our work is changing, and the government isn't changing that system in order to support the workers of the present and the workers of the future the same way that they've done it in the past. So the good news, there is good news, is that the lack of government action and the increasing need for these supports has actually resulted in this breeding ground for these new ideas and innovations, just like the ones you're going to hear on the panel today. And that's what I want to actually dive into next. So these innovations we sort of broke down into 4 categories. They generally take on one of these 4 forms. And just before I give you some examples, I want you to think about, as you're listening to the panel today and you're listening to these examples, I want you to think about what services and supports that you could use in your work and your life as an independent worker. And possibly think about using this as a framework for inspiring new ideas that actually could help contribute to the solution. So the first category is low-cost tech-enabled services, and essentially that just means we're talking about apps. And there's a lot of these available, but one example would be an app that was developed in the US called Dave, and this one was specifically for individuals that are facing income volatility. So it's an app that automatically alerts you if you're going to go into your overdraft and provides you with an advance of up to $75 interest-free. AndPro would be another example of an app, and this one is more specific to time tracking, more of those administrative reports. It even sends out paper copies into the mail for delinquent clients, so you don't have to go chasing down unpaid invoices. The next category is organized communities, and this is where people agree to work more closely together, and then they share in the benefits that they create. So Inspiral from New Zealand is a great example that provides an in-person and a platform community, and they help organize and collaborate. They fund ideas, create new projects and businesses. And then we all know Urban Workers Project. Woo! Today is a perfect example of one of the many things they do to support their members. We also have Freelancers Union, which is going to be on stage today, and they're a great example of one of these. The best way to think about the third category, platform cooperatives, would be if Upwork were owned by its freelancers or Uber were owned by its drivers. And one of our examples is actually just that. It's Green Taxi, and they're a Denver-based competitor to Uber, but they're actually owned 100% by their drivers. And they're actually a very successful company. They have about 1/3 of the Denver market. Another example would be an Up and Go, and this is based in New York City. It is specifically for home cleaning professionals, and they are co-owners of their own business, keeping 95 cents out of every dollar that their client spends, which is a lot more than the other platforms. Finally, if you start with large organizations like the Urban Workers Alliance or the Freelancers Union, you can actually start to create services for your membership that take advantage of that scale. So you can start to buy things at a cheaper cost, you can start to do things that you wouldn't be able to do as an individual or even as a small group. So an example of that would be in the US, home workers in the US developed the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and they created a service called Alia. And Alia is essentially giving the workers an opportunity to create their own benefit fund, and then workers that hire those people can actually contribute to that benefit fund, filling in some of those support gaps. So the workers can withdraw from that fund to use for things like sick days or disability insurance, even sometimes life insurance. Commonwealth here in Canada is another example, and they focus on creating pensions for low-income workers that don't typically have them. And because this service is so expensive to offer, they can actually only do that through their unions and other membership associations that they partner with. So there's 2 other really cool things we found during our research that I want to go into a little bit more detail. So the first one is called Tradie, and it was developed in Spain, and it's an app that is focusing on trying to solve the challenge that freelancers face when it comes to proving trust and reliability. Since you don't typically have access to things like pay stubs and employment letters, this essentially takes all of the history that you are building up online through your reputation, through your social media, through different payments, and it's attempting to change the way that people view that combined history and actually use it to prove reliability. So they're organizing it in a way that you can actually take that information to a bank and prove to them that you can be trusted to repay that lending. So the next example is called Bread Funds, and it was started in 2006 in the Netherlands by a group of independent workers, and they all decided to pool some of their income into a fund, and then they could withdraw from that fund at any time if they were sick for up to 2 years. So they were essentially creating their own disability insurance. And this program has actually gotten quite large and more sophisticated, but it's remained very community oriented. So they have about 321 groups and 14,000 members as part of that. And they attribute a lot of that success of the program to the fact that they keep those groups small. So it's a maximum of 50 members. Is there, I think we'll do, are you having trouble hearing?
Oh, it's the name is
it's called Bread Funds. Yeah. Up there, it's in the Dutch, so it's called Brood Funds up there. If you're wondering why it's called different. So they've actually found that organically, people have started to support each other beyond just the income, and they're actually starting to support each other through helping each other through finishing up projects and things like that when they're sick. Sorry, I'm getting like the time to wrap up, but there's so much more I want to share with you guys. How can I wrap this up? I guess just to tell you guys something that's really important that we found in our research is that this group of, or I guess all of these issues don't actually just affect freelancers. While we focused a lot on freelancers, there's a huge number of workers that are on temporary work or contract work that are also experiencing these exact same issues. And if you combine that group with you guys, it actually represents 30% of the workforce. And we think of this as a very significant number that just can't continue to be ignored. So what are some of the ways that government could step up? We think all of these are great innovations. The people you're going to hear on stage are amazing, but we still don't think it's enough to fill in all the gaps. So there are a few ways in which we think that government could add value. And things like universal basic income is a really strong idea for a way to solve the problem of people facing periods of time where they have low income, since a lot of people aren't now covered by employment insurance. Training is another one. We're all going to need to be lifelong learners. And there's countries like Singapore and France that are experimenting with doing shorter training through online and then giving you a small fund of money to be able to actually access those programs. BC has a great example of a recent commitment to inexpensive childcare, and this is an amazing example of the type of program that could benefit this community. But it's really important that we are asking questions like, is this childcare flexible enough for freelancers? Can I do short drop-offs to match my work schedule? We need to make sure that as we're designing these new programs, they're not for the workers of the past, but they're actually considering the workers of the future and the present. So I'm going to wrap it up there, but I just want to say that even though we are lacking in these government supports, we are so lucky to have people like the ones you're going to hear on stage today. They're incredibly inspiring, incredibly creative, and they're working so hard to bridge that gap between the work of the future and the supports that we need today. And we definitely need more ideas like that. So that's why I encourage all of you to get on your thinking caps and think of what you actually need. This is a really important panel today and a really important topic, and we're just thrilled to be a part of the discussion. So thank you so much.